Hey traders, it's John Fortune here with this week's weekly Forex Forecast. We're going to look at 20 markets in today's video, starting with the DXY as we always do. We're going to be looking at some of the best markets that I see going into next week. So starting with the DXY, I have been bullish over the last couple of months on the DXY, and we've seen the DXY rising. And last week we had this sell-off out of FOMC, the interest rate decision out of the US last week. I do go into next week with a bearish bias on the DXY. I view this as a near-term reversal. And it's worth just noting for new traders or newer followers to the channel that if you have an interest rate decision coming up in the week, and we have an Australian one and a UK one this week, which I'll be highlighting for you, but if you have an interest rate decision upcoming in the week, it has the ability to reverse the domestic currency, and very often it's the interest rate decisions and the rate statements and the monetary policy statements from the central banks which will reverse trends in currencies. So if you have an upcoming interest rate decision and you take a position before the interest rate decision, you are not doing anything wrong, but what you're doing, you're going to get involved in a position which is likely to get volatile. You're going to see a bigger move, and if it's in your favor, you will earn more from that trade. If it's against you though, you will lose more. So you're increasing your risk and reward on that trade essentially. So in my opinion, unless you have a very high conviction of what you believe the move is going to be out of the press conference, what you believe is going to be stated based on the underlying economic conditions and the direction the central bank should be heading or needs to be heading, then it's much better off in terms of risk management to wait until the interest rate decision comes out before you place trades in those currencies. Again, it's entirely up to you guys how you trade. I'm not here to tell you how to manage your accounts, but that's how I view interest rate decisions when they are upcoming in the week and how I personally prefer to trade them. Unless I have a very high conviction of what's going to be said, I'll wait until after the interest rate decisions to look for opportunities in those currencies. So very simply put, going into this week, I am looking for any continued pullback in this market is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for further declines. I'm going to be looking down towards the 91.41, and as I said, this gives me a bearish bias on the DXY going into next week. Next is euro-dollar. Now last week I highlighted this falling wedge type pattern in last week's weekly Forex Forecast, and that this is a bullish reversal pattern. However, I also noted that I was not prepared to trade this to the long side until we broke higher, because I do not pick tops and I do not pick bottoms. Yes, it feels great when you pick a top or you pick a bottom and the market moves in your direction, but over time it's very, very difficult to actually make the numbers work when you're trying to pick tops and bottoms in the long run. We did break higher, however, last week, and now we've had this confirmed breakout of this falling wedge. I do favor long positions in euro-dollar going into next week. Any pullback in this market is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 1.1969. Next is US dollar Swiss franc. Now US dollar Swiss franc is probably my favorite currency going into next week. There's a number of currencies which look nice, but I do like the US dollar Swiss franc currency pair to the downside. Last week we had that sell-off and the franc is particularly strong right now, and we can see the momentum coming into US dollar Swiss franc after breaking down from this head and shoulders over here. So very simply put, I do think the odds of getting lower lows in this market are very good. Any correction next week in this pair will be viewed as an opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at 0.9011. Next is pound dollar. Now last week we had a nice rally to the upside in pound dollar, and it looks like we're forming the basis of an inverse head and shoulders. Any pullback in this area, start to form the right shoulder, is simply going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals up to the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 1.4072. Next is US dollar yen. Now US dollar yen doesn't have quite the same momentum as say US dollar Swiss franc. However, I do think this is a good market next week to start to look for short positions. Any pullback in this market is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 108.84. Aussie dollar, New Zealand dollar and US dollar CAD are not in this week's video because the Australian dollar, the New Zealand dollar and the Canadian dollar are all fairly weak currencies at the moment, and I don't want to be trading them against a weaker dollar. There are going to be more markets which revolve around dollar weakness at the end of the video. We're going to look at copper, gold, silver and Bitcoin, and I would prefer to trade this dollar weak bias in those markets as opposed to Aussie dollar, New Zealand dollar and US dollar CAD next week. Next is crude oil. Now recently I have been bearish on crude oil. When we had this correction in this area, I did highlight this as an opportunity to look for short entries. We had this really nice sell-off, we pulled back, and last week I was looking for short positions once again in crude oil. But as the dollar sold off last week, crude oil started to grind to the upside. Now the issue I have this week with crude oil is it's technically structured to the downside with a target of the 70.45. However, with the DXY being weak and selling off, this is going to put some upward pressure on crude oil. So I would not be surprised to see crude oil reversing next week. That is to say, trading above the 75.05 and turning bullish. So going into next week, although technically speaking, it's still on for any short positions down to the 70.45. I don't think realistically short positions in crude oil next week are the best opportunities, and as a result I'll probably filter out any trades next week in crude oil. Don't be surprised to see this trading above the 75.05 and reversing. Next is CAD franc. Now CAD franc is the only Canadian dollar pair I'm actually really interested in next week, and although we had that rise in crude oil, we saw a bit of a strengthening in CAD franc. I am still looking for this to come down to the 0.7189. This was a market highlighted in last week's video, and so for anybody not already involved, we're looking for this pullback, and this was an opportunity to start short. The previous resistance area was up here. For anybody not already involved in CAD franc, any pullback in this market once again is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key support to the downside and the target set at the 0.7189. Next is Aussie franc. Now Aussie franc is a market that I've been highlighting as my favorite market really to the downside, and we've been taking out all of the targets to the downside recently. Last week we took out both targets and we finished the week right at the second target here. Going into this week, alongside US dollar Swiss franc, Aussie franc is again one of my favorite pairs. We have really nice momentum to the downside, and there's no reason, in my opinion, to be long this market. We do, remember, have an Australian interest rate decision coming up this week, but aside from that, this is one of my favorite markets. Any pullback in this market next week is simply going to be viewed once again as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key support to the downside and the target set, the 0.6596. Next is New Zealand franc. Now New Zealand franc was a market that I highlighted recently as a good market to look for short positions. When we pulled back in this area, I highlighted this as a good area to look for shorts. We had this sell-off, although it was somewhat limited. And last week we pulled back, and I highlighted this just as a bear flag setup, and this was a good market to look for shorts into the 0.63060. We did come down and we took out that target to the pip last week. Going into this week, I don't see any reason to be anything other than short this market once again. Any pullback in this market is going to be viewed as another opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key support to the downside and the target set at the 0.6235. I do like the Swiss franc pairs going into next week. Next is Aussie yen. Aussie yen is another market that I've been highlighting to the downside, an opportunity to look for short positions in this market. We've been coming down, taking out the targets here previously and bouncing. And last week I highlighted that this pullback is simply another opportunity to look for bearish reversals into the 79.80. Now we didn't really go very far last week, we just kind of corrected a little bit. I do think Aussie Swiss franc is probably a better market next week. However, for anybody not involved from last week, any pullback towards the 81.45 once again is going to be viewed as another opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the target set last week, the 79.80. Next is New Zealand yen. Now last week I highlighted the fact that this pullback in New Zealand yen was viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals, and we had a nice double top pattern here in New Zealand yen. We sold off and we started to correct, so for anybody not involved from last week, any pullback towards the 77.160 once again is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key support to the downside and the target set at the 75.31. Next is Pound Aussie. Now Pound Aussie is in a really nice uptrend, and I do like this market going into next week. Aussie short positions have been one of the better themes, and I've been highlighting Aussie weakness as something to look for over the last few weeks. I do still have that outlook. However, just remember we have an Australian interest rate decision next week. So you have to bear that in mind when you're looking at the Aussie pairs next week. Any pullback in this market, however, will be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key resistance, the upside and the target set at the 1.9116. Moving on to stocks and starting with the SPX. Now, in previous videos, I highlighted the fact I was looking for a rally into the 4430.58, and we came so close to this target, we stopped just a few points shy of this target. For anybody not already involved, I would like to see a pullback since we're so close to the target. Any pullback in this area would be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals into the 4430.58. And once we break through here, if we come up and take out this target first before correcting perhaps, any breakthrough here is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for target 2 at the 4485.83. Next is the Nasdaq. Now previously we rallied in the Nasdaq towards the target of the 15236.09, and I wanted to see a pullback in this market. We started to pull back, but we didn't really go very far at all. So very simply put, going into this week, I am still bullish on the Nasdaq. Any continued pullback is simply viewed as an opportunity to start to look for bullish reversals up towards the target set at the 15236.09. Next is Dow Jones. Now last week I highlighted the breakout to the upside in Dow Jones, and I am still bullish on the Dow Jones. This was the entire move for last week. We did not go anywhere in Dow Jones, so the analysis really remains the same. Any pullback in this market is simply viewed as an opportunity to start to look for bullish reversals up towards the next target set to the upside at the 35604.55. Next is the Nifty. Now the Nifty is a market which I've been bullish on ever since we had this inverse head and shoulders, and ever since we added this into the forecast, and we were taking out target after target until we got up in this area and we started threatening the target before pulling back, threatening to take out the target, pulling back. And last week we actually confirmed a head and shoulders reversal by breaking this low over here. Now, this does mean I go into next week with a bearish bias on the Nifty, and as we've already started to pull back, this is an area I would start to look for further declines down to the 15469.70. Something just to reiterate is that just because I have a bearish bias on the Nifty does not mean you have to go out and sell it. Some people like to trade stocks long only. That's fine. If you are doing that, it just simply means I would avoid trading the Nifty next week. It's more bearish than it is bullish, and I think the odds of this market declining next week are greater than the odds of the market rising. I would really, in order to turn bullish on the Nifty once again, I would rather be patient and wait for the market to start to trade significantly above the 1588185, which is here, like this for example, breaking the top of this range and then starting to pull back in this area. That is my preferred setup in terms of being bullish on the Nifty once again. Next is copper. Now copper is a market which is benefiting from the dollar weakness we saw last week, and we had a really nice rally recently in copper, and it looks to be starting the next leg to the upside after this near-term reversal here. We started to pull back. We're forming this bull flag type pattern, so any continued pullback in this market next week, especially if the DXY continues to sell off, and I do have a bearish bias on the DXY of course, but any pullback in this market will be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals into the next key resistance, the upside, the target set, the 4.6272. Next is gold. Now gold is an interesting one because we've seen previously real yields breaking to new lows. This is very bullish for gold. And what's interesting is last week we saw that reversal in the DXY. Now with real yields breaking down, the DXY was keeping a bit of a lid on gold prices to the upside. So now the DXY is broken down, if we start to see further declines in DXY alongside this sell-off in real rates, this really should put some wind underneath the sales of gold. And definitely going into next week, gold to the upside is one to watch. We started to pull back towards the 1797.35, and we have somewhat of a double bottom reversal here, and we're holding above the confirmation point of this pattern. Any continued pullback is simply viewed as an opportunity next week to look for bullish reversals into the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set at the 1851.22. Next is silver. Now with the DXY sell-off on FOMC, we saw silver reversing higher last week, and we have two types of patterns unfolding here. We have this bull flag, which is starting to correct, and this also looks like it's forming the right shoulder of a potential inverse head and shoulders reversal. So any correction in this area next week in silver is going to be the opportunity to start to look for bullish reversals up to the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set at 26.30. And last but not least, we have Bitcoin. Now, last week was the first week since I introduced Bitcoin into the weekly forecast that we turned bullish on Bitcoin. Ever since we had that large head and shoulders reversal, which is when I first introduced Bitcoin into the forecast, we had that big sell-off. I said to you guys, looks like we could come down hard. We did crash. Last week was the first week we turned bullish, and we took out both targets and then some in Bitcoin. It got very volatile last week. Going into this week, I am bullish once again on Bitcoin, and I think with the DXY selling off last week, this is going to lead potentially to more volatile moves to the upside in Bitcoin. What I would like to see is any pullback in this area will be viewed as another opportunity to look for bullish reversals in this market up towards the next key resistance to the upside and the target set at the 43,824. And if we can break through here, we're going to be looking up towards target 2 at the 47,044. And just interestingly enough, the 47,044 was the major breakdown in Bitcoin, and I think there's a good chance we could be heading back to the 47,044 once again to retest this level. So that is it for me for this week, guys. Those are the best opportunities and the best markets that I like going into next week. I do think dollar weakness could be a big theme going into next week, and I also like Swiss franc strength as well. Don't forget, we have interest rates out of Australia and out of the UK next week also, so that is something to keep in mind if you're trading those pairs. Apart from that, I want to say a big thank you to everybody who likes, shares and comments on the channel on a regular basis, and a big thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the channel so far. I want to wish you all a fantastic weekend, and I want to wish you all the best in your trading next week. The only thing left to say is take care and don't forget to trade safely.